Hello everyone, welcome to the Life Sketches channel. My name is Mia. Today I'm going to tell you the story that changed my life completely and led me to a deep conflict. I used to think that family ties were a safe harbour, until one day that safe harbour was replaced by complicated emotions. What if it was you? Would you be able to fight your own emotions? Don't forget to share your thoughts with me in the comments while listening to my story. I am a 22 years old, brunette, beautiful girl with a full body. My mother divorced when I was 15 and married a rich businessman named Victor a year later. Victor has always been a supportive father figure for me, giving me the opportunity to start a new life and contributing to my education. Recently, however, Victor's behaviour had become more and more confusing for me. That summer, I had returned to the family home to live with my mother and Victor for the entire vacation. Since my mother was always travelling for work, Victor and I were usually alone at home. That summer, Victor started to pay more attention to me than usual. He bought me gifts, talked to me about my studies, and even made jealous comments when I talked about my ex-boyfriends. That summer, things started to get weird. One day, Victor quietly came up behind me while I was cooking in the kitchen and said, "Mia, it's really impressive to be a strong and independent woman like you. But don't you sometimes feel lonely? I like talking to you. I like spending time with you because you really understand me." Although at first these words seemed to me to be father-daughter bonding, Victor's gaze and gestures began to change more and more clearly. At home, sometimes I would see him watching up my skirt when I was sitting, and I felt that he was keeping an eye on me under various pretexts. One night, I was lying in the living room, reading a book, when Victor came up to me and suggested we watch a movie together. During the movie, Victor sat very close to me and gently put his hand on my shoulder. I could feel his breath on the back of my neck, in my hair. I felt uncomfortable, but I couldn't say anything. During the movie, Victor told me about his family and his relationship with my mother. He said, "Your mum doesn't understand me at all, Mia. But you are different. Every time I see you, I feel a strange peace inside me. Something flows towards you. I can't take my eyes off you." These words plunged me into a deep sense of shock and guilt. I didn't know what to do. I was caught between the gratitude and respect I felt for Victor on the one hand, and these complicated feelings on the other. I began to like her more and more, and this liking made me feel something more than a father's affection. One day, while my mother was out of town, I was in the kitchen preparing dinner for myself. I was wearing a very elegant dress, suitable for the summer heat, made of thin fabric, slightly low-cut and mini, slightly see-through, flowery. At that moment, Victor came quietly into the kitchen and started to watch me quietly from behind. Suddenly, I felt a shiver run down my spine. When I turned around and looked at Victor, the look in his eyes made me feel something very different from a father figure. It gave me a very different feeling. Victor coughed slightly as if trying to get my attention. "It looks like you are very elegant today. You look more beautiful than ever," he said with a smile. "It's hot. It's just the heat," I replied. But when I felt the strangeness in Victor's gaze, I started to think more about how the outfit I was wearing looked. Victor moved across the table and continued talking. "Sometimes I feel that your mother doesn't really understand me. She has been making me feel so lonely for so long, not responding to my needs as a man at all. Mia, but you are completely different. Just talking to you, your presence in the house gives me so much peace and happiness." At these words, my heart began to beat rapidly. Victor slowly approached me and ran his hand through my hair, tucking a strand behind my ear. Meanwhile, I could feel Victor's breath and the mixed emotions in his eyes. As the distance between us closed, Victor hesitantly placed a kiss on my cheek. This kiss was far from innocent. I knew I had to stop it, but I was caught up in the attraction of the moment. I was filled with excitement, with lust. This should never have happened. When our lips were about to meet, I suddenly pulled myself back and rushed to my room. I felt both guilt and a confusing desire, Victor's gaze and touch echoing over and over in my mind. I was angry with myself and ashamed of myself for wanting this intimacy. I was haunted by it for days. Every night I would get into this conflict and stay up all night wanting him. I wanted Victor with my whole body. Victor became quieter and more cautious after those days. But Victor's behaviour was only adding to the confusion in my mind. I decided to confront Victor to find a solution. This issue had to be closed. It had to be clear. It was not something that could be left hanging. A week later, I texted Victor and asked if I could talk to him. Victor suggested we meet outdoors and invited me to a nearby park. As we walked side by side, the attraction between us took a strange turn, and he suddenly grabbed my hand. Then, breaking the silence, he spoke. "Mia, I'm sorry about that night, but every time I see you, I have a hard time controlling myself. I want you so much. I can't stop the attraction I feel for you. I want you, Mia." I didn't know what to say with those words. Somewhere in my heart, I admitted that I couldn't resist these feelings. Victor slowly reached for my hand and wrapped his fingers around mine. Despite my inner conflict, I didn't pull my hand away. We continued walking through the park, holding hands. Things were getting more and more interesting for us. Where was this situation taking us? One day, my mother took a sudden business trip, and Victor and I were alone for a week, during which time Victor's interest in me increased. Victor was getting more and more of my attention, which made me feel uncomfortable, but at the same time strangely attracted to him. I began to try to get his attention around the house. Victor prepared a dinner for me that evening, and during the meal he said, "Mia, talking to you is one of the most peaceful moments of my life. You are not just a stepdaughter, you are so much more to me." This confession turned everything they had told me in the park upside down. I couldn't play this evasive game any longer. I turned to him and said, "Yes, Victor, I don't just see you as a father either." He was very relieved by these words. As soon as I had finished, he reached over to me and grabbed my lips. At that moment, the world stopped in the kitchen. I was in the arms of my mother's husband, in the arms of the man who had been a father to me for years. I was at peace in his arms. Volcanoes were erupting inside me. It was an indescribable happiness. But while we were in that fiery moment, suddenly there was a sound. My mother's voice was heard through the door. It couldn't be. My mother had suddenly had to return from a business trip. Suddenly, we saw my mother's gaze. It was a moment of tension. My mother called out angrily, "Mia, what are you doing here? Victor is like your father. How can this be real, Mia?" I turned to my mother and absurdly told her that nothing had happened, but the disappointment on her face and Victor's failure to explain the situation made things even more complicated. On the one hand, the guilt I felt towards my mother, and on the other, the unbearable passion I felt for Victor. I want him by my side, but will this relationship ruin the rest of my life? My heart hurts every time I think of the disappointment on my mother's face, but I still feel the warmth of those moments in Victor's arms. I don't know if it's right or wrong. Sometimes our feelings override our logic, but the reason I'm telling you this story is so you don't have to go through this alone. Would you choose your family or follow your heart? Please share your thoughts in the comments. If you have similar stories to mine, don't forget to share them too. I would love to hear about your experiences too. And remember, this channel exists because of you. Subscribe and stay tuned for more stories. By sharing these stories, we can feel that we are not alone. Thank you.